Hi, welcome to another episode of ColdFusion. In the quiet deserts of China's Gansu province, something extraordinary just happened. What's claimed to be the world's first operational thorium reactor has come to life. And what makes this extra remarkable is that they did it all using declassified American research. It's an incredible story. For decades, thorium has been whispered about as the holy grail of nuclear energy. It's meant to be cleaner, safer, and almost impossible to weaponize. In fact, 5 years ago, on this very channel, I explored the theory of thorium in one of my videos. But today, it's a reality. But this isn't just a scientific milestone. It's a glimpse into a future where energy innovation isn't driven by profit, but by public investment. And it shows what happens when we decide to bet on long-term research for a payoff in the order of half a century. In this episode, we dig deep into the big picture of a better, safer nuclear energy called thorium reactors. We'll also try to separate the hype from the reality. If the Chinese test proves successful and scalable, could this prove to be a turning point in the history of energy production? Or is it not all it's cracked up to be? Let's take a look.
You are watching ColdFusion TV.
5,000 tons of thorium would supply the planet with all of its energy for a year. So your one mine would bring up enough thorium without even trying to power the entire planet.
It's found in tailings piles. It's found in ash piles.
We could use thorium about 200 times more efficiently than we're using uranium now. This reduces the waste generated over uranium by factors of hundreds and by factors of millions over fossil fuels.
But before we get started, just some quick housekeeping. ColdFusion episodes are now available on Spotify, so you can watch them there if you prefer. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've had to burn fossil fuels to turn on our lights, cook our food, and power our lives. It works, but the downside is serious air pollution, billions of dollars in healthcare expenses, and millions of preventable deaths. And then in the wake of World War II came the nuclear age. Nuclear power was different. It was amazingly efficient and seemed like the future. But over time, there were problems with its public image and fears of nuclear disaster. Enter thorium. Thorium appears to be the perfect solution. It's abundant, it's less volatile and less reactive than uranium, and a nuclear plant powered by thorium can't suffer from a nuclear meltdown. In the Chinese reactor, for instance, if things do get out of hand, a plug at the bottom of the reactor melts automatically. The fuel then simply drains out using gravity, a much better scenario than the unstoppable chain reaction of traditional reactors. For added context, to give you a picture of just how efficient thorium reactors are, just look at this chart. It shows the ratio of energy out to energy in. The purple bar is a thorium molten salt reactor, and the blue bar next to it is a traditional nuclear reactor. If thorium is proved successful, it's clear to see why it's world-changing stuff, especially when compared to any previous form of energy production. Despite thorium's immense potential, compared to hundreds of uranium-based nuclear reactors, they remain as mythical as a unicorn. There's only one operational thorium reactor, and it's hidden away in the Gobi Desert. China may possess the world's sole reactor, but the twist is, it was built on American research.
We're all at Oak Ridge. The morning that we showed up, one of the Oak Ridge guys came in with an announcement from the Chinese Academy of Science. We are going to do this, we're going to own the IP. So you would think someone in our government would say, maybe you shouldn't keep giving away this information.
The Chinese achievement was announced by head of the thorium reactor project, Zhu Hongxie. During a closed-door meeting at the Chinese Academy of Science, he stated, quote, "The US left its research publicly available, waiting for the right successor. We were that successor. We mastered every technique in the literature, then pushed it further. We are now at the frontier of global nuclear innovation." End quote. So okay, let's back up a bit and learn what a thorium reactor actually is. Firstly, thorium is a naturally occurring element found in rock deposits. It serves as the fuel for the reactor. When thorium is hit with neutrons, it absorbs instead of splitting, eventually turning into a fissile material, uranium-233. A fissile material is one that splits apart when neutrons are blasted at the atoms. When this happens, energy is released that can then be converted into electricity, usually by heating steam and driving a turbine. Unlike uranium, the naturally occurring thorium-232 is not fissile, meaning it cannot sustain a nuclear reaction on its own. However, it is fertile, so it can be transformed into a fissile material, but it needs a helping hand getting there. For thorium to become a useful fuel source, it first has to be blasted with neutrons, turning it into thorium-233, which beta decays into protactinium-233. The protactinium can be extracted, which decays into uranium-233, a usable fuel.
There really were three options for nuclear energy at the dawn of the nuclear era. There was uranium-235, which was the fissile form of uranium. This was the form of uranium that could actually be utilized directly in a nuclear reactor. Most of the uranium was uranium-238. This had to be transformed into another nuclear fuel called plutonium before it could be used. And then there was thorium. And in a similar manner to uranium-238, it also had to be transformed into another nuclear fuel, uranium-233, before it could be used in a reactor.
Now this process doesn't work well with traditional nuclear reactors because they use solid fuel rods and pressurized water cooling. It's much harder to extract things mid-reaction when fuel is in solid form. Enter molten salt reactors.
The molten salt fuel for this reactor is radically different from that used in solid fuel reactors. Here, salt flows from a pipe which is heated to keep the salt molten. At 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, the salt does not react with air. It flows like water, but does not boil.
To recap, molten salt reactors use liquid fuel, which makes it much easier to isolate protactinium and continue the thorium fuel cycle. If done right, molten salt reactors can be way safer than the standard water-cooled reactors, the latter of which must be kept under insanely high pressures to stop the water from boiling away. Molten salt reactors can operate at low pressure, and as mentioned, are set up in a way that in the case of an emergency, the fuel is automatically drained away, avoiding the chance of this happening.
It was the first step in a nuclear nightmare. As far as we know at this hour, no worse than that. But a government official said that a breakdown in an atomic power plant in Pennsylvania today is probably the worst nuclear reactor accident to date. There was no apparent serious contamination of workers, but a nuclear safety group said that radiation inside the plant is at 8 times the deadly level, so strong that after passing through a 3-foot thick concrete wall, it can be measured a mile away.
But the worst was yet to come. The earthquake created a power blackout at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. The emergency generators started but did not run for long. The cooling pumps did not restart, and about 45 minutes later, the tsunami reached the nuclear plant. The entire nuclear plant quickly became out of control. Starting March 12, 2011, one of the 6 reactor units exploded, followed not long after by 2 others, releasing an unprecedented amount of nuclear radiation into the air.
Despite not being a ready-to-use fuel and requiring complex processing, if done right, thorium could be a superior alternative to uranium for 4 reasons. Number 1, it's abundant. Thorium is everywhere. It's in the Earth's crust, in rocks, and it's at least 3 times more abundant than uranium. In China alone, there's enough thorium reserves to power the country's energy needs for the next 20,000 years. Number 2, it's safer. As I mentioned earlier, thorium itself isn't fissile, and while that sounds like a downside, it can actually be a good thing. It grants more control over the reaction. Some pro-thorium advocates also emphasize that thorium is, quote, proliferation resistant, meaning that you can't easily make bombs with it. But others say that these safety claims are exaggerated, just as the risks of nuclear reactors are. But also, because of the reactor design, the use of molten salt as a coolant eliminates the need for high-pressure water systems like traditional designs, reducing the risk of accidents like a steam explosion. Number 3, it's cleaner. Thorium reactors also don't emit greenhouse gases, and unlike uranium waste, which remains hazardous for tens of thousands of years, thorium waste becomes safe in just a few hundred years. In the case of China, obtaining thorium could come at almost zero effort. Surprisingly, thorium is actually a waste product of its rare earth mining industry.
We can power our civilization on thorium without opening a single thorium mine. It is already a plentiful byproduct of existing mining operations.
Number 4, it's efficient. thorium generates up to 200 times more energy than uranium. To put it into context, just say you have two batteries. One is uranium and one thorium. If the uranium battery gives you 1 day of power, a thorium battery of the same size would power you for 6.5 months. Despite all of this, molten salt reactors have largely been stuck in the experimental phase for decades.
So why aren't we working on liquid fuel in the United States in general?
Oh, licensing. Licensing a liquid fuel reactor, commercial especially in the US right now, is scary.
The nuclear status quo remained unchallenged. Not even after countless reactor meltdowns, no one's made any moves to put the molten salt reactor theory into practice until now. Over in China, Xu and his team developed the reactor technology from American declassified research of the 1960s. The US was testing this very same technology but chose not to develop it further. Instead, they focused on uranium-fueled pressurized water reactor technology. That 1960s research was known as Oak Ridge. It was the closest America came to thorium power. But why did they stop? We'll look into that now.
NRC regulations specifically spell out prohibitions against fluid-filled reactors. You cannot operate a fluid-filled reactor more than 1 megawatt without expensive license process.
After the Hiroshima bomb tipped the scales of power in America's favor, the US was keen to develop more nuclear weapons. Much of that work happened at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. Director Alvin Weinberg also began looking into alternative, less weaponizable nuclear methods. Thorium-fueled molten salt reactors were what he settled on. The molten salt reactor experiment ran from 1965 to 1969. The results were incredibly promising. It quickly became the holy grail of thorium research. As the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists states, quote, "All molten salt reactors are based in one way or another on the molten salt reactor experiment that operated at Oak Ridge from 1965 to 1969, end quote.
Following the vision of Alvin Weinberg, he was the director of Oak Ridge National Labs from the 50s to the 1970s, and he had a vision of how we could use thorium to advance beyond the current constraints of our society in terms of fossil fuels, hydropower, and existing nuclear technology. One of the amazing parts about his vision was how this could transform not only the US economy, but many other places in the world, some of which don't have the resources that we have in terms of fresh water or arable land. This is a vision he had of how thorium reactors could be used to desalinate water, grow crops in desert areas, to really truly change the economic balance of the world.
But then, the experiment was shut down. In his book, Alvin Weinberg questioned, quote, "Why didn't the molten salt system, so elegant and so well thought out, prevail? There were no technical reasons why the molten salt reactor was not pursued," end quote. For one, during the Cold War, uranium fever was at an all-time high. The Pentagon needed faster breeder reactors that could fuel the nuclear arms race. In short, nobody cared that thorium was safer, or that it wasn't suitable for weaponry. That somewhat defeated the point.
Weinberg's vision, on the other hand, was brought to an end in the early 1970s. And I think this was a very sad moment in the history of our country and probably in the history of the world, because an entire direction of potential development was being ended at that moment by a not well thought out comment by Congressman Holyfield, who was very powerful. So Weinberg's pursuit of thorium appears to have had a great deal to do with why he was fired from his position.
Coming back with what will be built, again, it's light water reactors. I don't understand what's going on here. Why are we spending money to build reactors based on the same concept that we have been building ever since World War II?
It wasn't all about politics though. According to Alvin, in the 1950s and 60s, nuclear power was dominated by physicists who thought in terms of solid fuel pins, reactor physics, and neutron behavior. All the while, the key to safer nuclear power lay in chemistry. Quote, "Our problem is not that the idea is poor, it's that it's different from the mainstream and too chemical to be fully appreciated by non-chemists," end quote. We'll look at the counterpoints to what Alvin is saying in the last section of this episode. But for now, let's see what happens next. So, The Oak Ridge experiment was defunded, Alvin was reassigned, and the thorium blueprints gathered dust. That was until the 2000s. At that time, NASA engineer Kirk Sorensen was researching ways to power a community on the moon. Kirk stumbled across Oak Ridge's research on molten salt reactors and thorium, and he was mesmerized by thorium's energy density. It was so high that you could theoretically hold a lifetime's worth of energy in your hand, and it was abundant on both the Earth and on the moon. Kirk got to work to get the message out about thorium. He was convinced that if the United States hadn't abandoned thorium research, the country could have been energy independent by the early 2000s. But alas, his thorium enthusiasm fell on deaf ears. But here, the story takes a major turn. While seemingly everyone was ignoring what he had to say, one country did notice the potential: China. There were thousands of reports sitting there in public archives with insights that could shape the next generation of energy, and the Chinese researchers realized that a thorium-fueled molten salt reactor could solve their growing energy needs and also secure their national interests. In 2009, China's thorium project formally took shape. Construction began in 2018. There were hundreds of scientists who worked day and night for years, dissecting declassified American documents, replicating experiments, and designing new materials, and many of them were on site for more than 300 days per year. Project lead Zhu would summarize the situation by saying, quote, "Rabbits sometimes make mistakes and grow lazy. That's when the tortoise seizes its chance," and seized the chance they did. In 2023, China's thorium molten salt reactor achieved a sustained nuclear chain reaction, and by June of 2024, the reactor was operational. And now we come to the reality check. We may be closer than ever before to a thorium-powered future, but there are still many things to consider. Contrary to popular belief, there have been a number of commercial thorium plants in the past, and that's since the late 40s in Germany, India, the Netherlands, and the US, but none of them survived past the 1980s. Well, why is that? Some plants did have design problems, but there's more to it. It turns out that the process of extracting thorium from ore and converting it into a fertile fuel for nuclear purposes was a lot more expensive than doing the same thing for uranium. The pessimist view is that economics killed thorium, and nothing else. As mentioned, thorium can produce 200 times the energy of the equivalent uranium, but this requires the reprocessing of the fuel. You can't just run the plant and burn up all the thorium. And that's because as the plant would keep running, at some point, the accumulation of waste products affects the operation of a thorium core. And as you guessed it, to keep this up and keep the plant running long term is expensive. And another clarification, a lot of people do say that the reason that thorium hasn't caught on was that it can't be used for weapons. But it's more along the lines that it's more expensive to use it as a weapon, which is a good thing in the end, I guess. And then there's the problem of materials science. For molten salt reactors, the salt is extremely hot and ends up being corrosive to its surroundings. Materials that can survive this long term are hard to come by, but the Chinese seem to be working on the issue. They've built a custom alloy called Haseloy N. So let's say that thorium can do what the thorium proponents say it can. Nations could power entire cities. There'd literally be no need for fossil fuels, expensive and short-lived wind turbines, or even solar panels that degrade over time. Plus, since molten salt reactors don't need water cooling, they could run in deserts, or even space.
Thorium is also common on the moon and easy to find. Here's an actual map of where the lunar thorium is located. Thorium has an electromagnetic signature that makes it easy to find even from a spacecraft. With the energy generated from a liquid fluoride thorium reactor, we can recycle all of the air, water, and waste products within the lunar community. In fact, doing so would be an absolute requirement for success.
Thorium critics say that a lot of the promising claims are oversimplified, and the road to thorium will be a real, long slug. China has made some serious moves, but it's still early days. Case in point, the Chinese test reactor is actually tiny, and it's not a full-fledged power plant. It's rated for 2 megawatts of heat. For context, MIT's research reactor on campus, a regular nuclear reactor, although the biggest campus reactor in the US, is 3 times that size. But there's also plans for a 60 megawatt Chinese reactor to be operational by 2030. The Chinese scientists pulled off a world first. They added fresh fuel to the thorium reactor while it was running. That proved that continuous operation is possible. And soon, China may not be alone. Copenhagen Atomics plans to test a molten salt thorium reactor in Switzerland in 2026. After this, they plan to mass manufacture them at scale. Other countries are moving, but at a slower pace. India, which has the world's largest thorium reserves, have been researching thorium for ages, but refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that slowed progress. There's multiple startups in the US that are trying to revive the molten salt reactor development, and there's other startups in other countries, but most of this development remains mostly on paper. But even if it is early days, it's encouraging that people are trying. The thorium story shows the power of public research and how past R&D can seed waves of innovation decades later. But it also shows how easily research momentum can stall. As Zhu Hongxie put it, quote, "To achieve something meaningful in this field, you must have perseverance and prepare to dedicate 20 to 30 years to one single pursuit," end quote. So, there's red-hot views on either side of the thorium debate. Is it the clean revolution of the future? Or do we cut our potential losses and stick with what we know? That is the question. So I'd love to hear what you guys think. These days, everyone is talking about fake news. Getting informed is more complicated than ever before, but who's going to do something about it? Well, today's sponsor, Ground News, is doing just that. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer. She was on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Using this story of Trump saying that the US and Iran are close to a nuclear deal as an example, over 350 news outlets covered this story. Left-leaning outlets are skeptical of the Iran nuclear deal negotiations. They portray Trump's rhetoric as aggressive and destabilizing. The right-wing outlets, on the other hand, call this a victory, using terms like huge, caves, and crush them into oblivion. Let's take a look at some sources and see how the issue is framed. On the left, the publication News and Records states, Trump claims US-Iran sort of have an agreement. And Responsible Statecraft states, zero enrichment fantasies will lead us to war. Meanwhile, on the right, the Daily Wire frames it as, nearly every congressional Republican wants Trump to show no mercy with Iran deal. I can compare every single article on the topic with convenient tags. Tags that show me context about the source, like how factual it is. On the right-hand side of the screen, we can see the bias distribution, 25% left, 44% center, and 32% right. I've personally found Ground News to be a valuable tool when researching more controversial topics. It makes it much easier to have a well-rounded understanding of a topic versus manually looking for opposing views to contrast. Ground News' blind spot feed is also great. This shows you stories that have been underreported by one side of the political spectrum. For example, if you're on the left, you may have missed this story about satellite imagery, revealing what's alleged to be a secret Iranian nuclear weapons facility. So, Ground News is a fantastic tool for getting international views, shifting through misinformation, and identifying bias. They provide you all the tools you need to be a critical thinker. Today, Ground News is offering 40% off their Vantage subscription. This comes with a feature called My News Bias, so you can even track your news viewing habits over time. To get started, go to ground.news/ColdFusion. Anyway, that's about it from me. Thanks for watching. My name is Dagogo. If you want to see anything else on science, technology, or business, feel free to subscribe to ColdFusion. There's plenty of interesting topics here. Alright, so I'll see you again soon for the next episode. Cheers guys. Have a good one.